Chapter 25, Zaglama Valley, Magnetic Mountains? I mused, puzzled by my mechanical watch that had recently either stopped or was running erratically. I had assumed it was just a low-quality timepiece that had failed in the harsh desert conditions. Could it be that we were near those magnetic mountains? Anlaman recalled hearing stories about the heart of the Black Desert, where purportedly stood two divine mountains of Zaglama, one red and one white, believed to be the burial grounds of prophets. Shirley Young added, if such mountains truly exist in the desert, then it's possible that the Zidu underground river is being diverted by the magnetic influence, lying too deep below the surface for us to find. Instead of focusing solely on searching for the river, we should consider the legends and the account of the British explorer. If they're correct, the magnetic mountains might be nearby. Mr. Hu, tonight we may need your skills in celestial feng shui again. Don't forget our agreement. If we locate Jingjue, the reward will be doubled. From the onset, I had little faith in finding Jingjue and agreed to try again only by nightfall. If I can locate the Zaglama Mountains, my remuneration would increase to $20,000. If not, we would have to consider retreating. To be honest, I wasn't sure if I wanted to discover Jingjue. After hearing the story of the Jingjue Queen, a mysterious and alluring image haunted me, and I felt an invisible force pulling me towards the heart of the desert. I wondered if Professor Chin, Shirley Yang, and those explorers who never returned felt the same draw. The day seemed unbearably long, and I wished I could shoot the sun straight out of the sky. Despite digging a very deep sandpit and erecting thick canvas for shade, the heat was oppressive, as if lying in an oven. Yi Sin, who had a slight frame, might have been sun-addled, as she babbled incoherently in her sleep. We worried she was suffering from a fever. Her forehead was as hot as the sand around us, making it impossible to tell if fever was returning. No matter how we prodded her, she did not wake. We still had a modest supply of water, sufficient for about 5 days, and 2 bags of sour yogurt soup reserved for extreme situations. There was no point in holding back now, so I gave one to Shirley Yang to feed a few sips to Yi Sin, along with some medicine. After taking the medicine, Yi Sin settled down but remained unconscious, likely suffering from acute dehydration, a serious complication. I discussed with Professor Chun and the others the dilemma faced by our archaeological team. The team was presented with 2 choices: return tonight, enduring the last days of our journey with camel meat as sustenance and drinking brackish water from sandpits, an option which, despite being prudent, still couldn't ensure Yi Sin's safety. The alternative was to push on, continuing our search for Jingjue City in the hope that we could find a water source to save her life. Professor Chun acknowledged the severe difficulties we faced. Although archaeology requires a spirit of sacrifice, Yi Sin was young, and we had a responsibility to her life. The first option, although safe, was challenging due to the lack of fresh water, while the second, more adventurous route presented a 60% chance of finding Jingjue City near Zaglama Valley. The ancient city surely had underground water streams, though 2,000 years later, whether those streams had dried up or changed course was uncertain. Now it was up to us to decide the way forward, and everyone was encouraged to share their perspective. Fatty humorously noted he had lost 2 belt sizes and joked about being called skinny if we continued into the depths of the desert. He suggested that as soon as the sun set, we should leave without hesitation and perhaps save at least some of our lives. Halai Gua and Sudi Pong, more conservative, agreed with turning back. On the other hand, more team members favored the riskier approach of searching for Jingjue City, not willing to discount the sacrifices and efforts made thus far. They hoped to find fresh water in the city's ruins to save Yi Sin's life. Drinking salty water from the sandpits would be a last resort and could be dangerous for even the healthy among us, let alone someone as critically ill as Yi Sin. Aborting the mission now felt like a death sentence for her. Myself, Shirley Yang, Chu Jian, and Professor Chun shared this view. Everyone's gaze then turned to Anlaman, the only one who hadn't voiced an opinion. As our guide, his decision carried significant weight. If he chose to return, the vote would be evenly split 4-4. However, his decision could tilt the scales in either direction due to his expertise and familiarity with the desert. I spoke to Anlaman, emphasizing the gravity of his decision. Old man, think carefully before you speak. Your word affects Yi Sin's life. What do you think we should do now? Clutching his tobacco pipe, Anlaman squinted at the sun and finally said, "I, of course, follow the will of Allah. There is only one sun in the sky, and there is only one Almighty in the world. Allah will guide us." I gestured upward. "Well, then ask Allah for guidance already. What does he say?" With solemn reverence, Anlaman tapped out his pipe, stowed it at his waist, and started to pray. Holding his palms inward toward his face, he recited verses from the Quran with utmost devotion, a far cry from his usual sly demeanor. We waited as he chanted unceasingly. Even Fatty grew impatient and asked, "Old man, are you done yet?" Opening his eyes, Anlaman smiled and said, "Allah has already given us a sign." He then took out a 5-cent coin, showed it to everyone. The side with characters meant to continue forward, while the side with a picture indicated to return the way we came. He suggested the elder, Professor Chun, tosses it into the air, and its landing would reveal Allah's will. Everyone looked on in a mixture of amusement and disbelief. Was this how Allah's guidance would be revealed? Professor Chan tossed the coin high into the air, and everyone watched it intensely as it caught the gleaming sunlight and fell, standing upright when it landed in the sand. Remarkably rare occurrence. Anlaman shook his head in resignation, his face displaying deep loss. He seemed to have forgotten that we were in the Black Desert, abandoned by Allah. How could Allah possibly show us the way? As we puzzled over the peculiar way the coin had landed, Shirley Young pointed into the distance and exclaimed, "Oh my God, is that the Zaglama Mountains?" The desert's vast openness offers an unobstructed view for miles, and where Shirley was pointing, aligned with the direction in which the coin had landed. At the edge of the horizon, a faint black line could be seen, barely discernible at such a great distance. We hastily grabbed a telescope to take a closer look, adjusting the focus. A black mountain range was revealed, like a still black dragon amid the endless expanse of yellow sand. The range was bisected, with a gap that resembled a mountain pass, all features consistent with those recorded in the British explorer's notebook. Last year, Shirley Yang's father led an expedition based on these same clues in search of the ancient city of Jingjue. Whether they ever reached this divine mountain and what they might have encountered, if anything at all, remained a mystery as they never returned. A chilling thought crossed my mind under the scorching sun, but it was quickly dispelled by the exhilarating prospect that, after such a perilous journey, we might have finally found the gateway to the ancient kingdom of Jingjue. However, Anlaman had spoken of a fantastical place in the Black Desert where mirages frequently occurred. The beguiling visions that led travelers to their doom. Was what we saw the actual divine mountains, or just another illusion? Upon reflection, I reasoned that it couldn't be a mirage. Mirages in the desert are the result of light refraction, often depicting strange wonders that don't exist. Yet, this black range had been mentioned before. It had to be real. Since Jingjue seemed close at hand, we planned to set off after dark. Nevertheless, the information we had was limited, mostly conjecture based on related legends. The only somewhat reliable piece of evidence we had was a blurry black-and-white photograph. Whether we could actually find Jingjue, or even if such a city existed, was uncertain. Like many accounts passed down through time, perhaps everything we pursued was born from exaggeration and myth. On the Korean battlefield, General Douglas MacArthur once said, "In the beginning, we thought we knew everything, but as it turned out, we knew nothing." Now, I seem to be experiencing this same feeling. Are the ruins of the royal city still unburied by the yellow sands? Could a water source be found within the city? Is the ancient tomb of the Jingjue queen located within the city, or is it elsewhere? Does the city truly contain mountains of treasure? What exactly was the monstrous queen? Does she still pose a threat to outsiders even in death? Did Shirley Yang's father and his party indeed perish within the ancient city of Jingjue, and can their bodies be found? What did those foreign explorers encounter within the city? For us, all of this remains an unknown. At dusk, the archaeological team set off toward Zaglama. As the saying goes, distant hills look green. But walking towards them proved arduous, and we reached the mountain's pass only after midnight. By then, the moonlight spread like water, and the desert seemed like a silent sea. In this sandy ocean, Zaglama's undulating terrain was prominent. composed entirely of black stones that became more striking as we drew nearer. To call them mountains was a misnomer. They appeared more like two enormous black rocks, each with a diameter of several tens of kilometers, rising just slightly above the sand sea. With most of their mass buried underground, the two stones could quite possibly be connected below, with the mountain pass being merely a crack on the surface of the rocks. These black stones, containing magnetite, had a low average content, yet were enough to disrupt our precision directional equipment. We also began to feel the metal items we carried getting gradually heavier. The black stones did not reflect the moonlight at all. Besides the unconscious Yi Sin, everyone dismounted from their camels to proceed on foot. I reminded everyone to stay alert. In this devil's mouth of a valley, any carelessness could be fatal. Leading the way with Anlaman, Fatty, and Chujian bringing up the rear, Shirley Yang and the rest took care of Yi Sin in the middle, and our line proceeded slowly into the valley. The ancient people revered this mountain as sacred, suggesting that it entombed prophets, a belief likely steeped more in myth than fact. But from a feng shui perspective, the location held commanding power, seemingly swallowing the aura of all around. The Black Mountains stood like two black dragons standing guard. While it may be a stretch to imagine saints buried atop these mountains, it wouldn't be surprising at all if behind these mountains lay the resting place of the Jingjue Queen. The Taklamakan, the second largest shifting desert in the world, has been gradually encroaching southward after complete desertification, which has exposed the once buried divine Zaglama Mountains. When the moon was directly overhead, the north-south-oriented valley was pitch black, and we could hardly see. With every step forward, we trudged deeper, growing more anxious. Once we exited the valley, would we find the ancient city of Jingjue? If we found the city, would there still be a water source within it? Our greatest concern was Yi Sin's condition. Her acute dehydration needed treatment with large volumes of clean, cold saline water. If we didn't find a water source within 3 days, her life would be forfeit to the desert. Our watches had long stopped, and we had no concept of time. But intuition told us that dawn was near. Suddenly, the camel's breathing became heavy and agitated. Anlaman quickly blew his whistle and shouted, trying to calm the animals. His 19 camels were robust, hand-picked males who had never behaved this way during our days in the desert. The camel's distress, compounded with the darkness, only served to heighten the fear among the team members. Concerned that Yi Sin could be thrown off, Shirley Yang and Allah hurried to lift her down from the camel's back. I beckoned Fatty over and asked him to carry Yi Sin for a while. Having grown thin from days in the sun and scarce water, she was light, and besides, carrying a beautiful woman wasn't the worst task. He lifted her with relative ease and urged Anlaman to move faster. Despite Anlaman's efforts, the camels refused to budge. The old guide's doubt crept in, fearing that Allah might be preventing us from proceeding and that we should retreat. As we neared the valley's exit and chaos ensued, no one was inclined to turn back. Shirley Yang suggested that something ahead might be scaring the camels and advised me to throw a flare to illuminate the way. I agreed and lit a cold flare, throwing it forward. It brightened a small portion of the valley ahead, reflecting off the dark, rocky sides and casting light upon the thick sand below. The silent hills held no life, not even a single plant, and nothing unusual was visible. I advanced a few more steps and threw another illumination flare, which lit up the area and revealed a person seated on the ground in the distance. As we approached, we saw that the figure was dressed in a white robe, with a sand-protecting scarf wrapped around his head and a backpack, completely motionless, a dead man. Coming across a dead body or a mummy in the desert is not unusual, but this corpse was different. It was a man with his mouth covered by a scarf, eyes wide open, staring at the sky, a clear sign of an untimely death, perhaps too sudden for him to close his eyes. The state of the body suggested he hadn't been dead for long, possibly only a few days. The exposed skin was slightly dried, and in the most peculiar fashion, his flesh had a greenish hue that glowed faintly blue under the flare's light. Some wanted to take a closer look, but I stopped them. The man had died under strange circumstances, and it was best not to get too close. Suddenly Chu Jian yelled out, "Brother Hu, look, there's another body." Feeling a shiver, I realized that there could be more. I threw a few more flares, illuminating the surroundings and revealing not just two, but four male corpses lying in disarray. All the deceased were dressed similarly and seemed to have died in the same way, with a look of terror in their open eyes. Among them on the ground were several Soviet-style AK-47 rifles and some backpacks. With a sense of caution, I pulled out my entrenching tool to use as a weapon for self-defense. I picked up one of the rifles and noted that it was loaded. How strange. Around Xinjiang, some poachers used foreign-made Remingtons or Chinese military-type 56 rifles. What were these Soviet AKs doing here? Could these men be the tomb robbers who had blasted open the stone tomb? Opening one of the backpacks, I found several blocks of military-grade yellow explosives with Russian markings, likely smuggled into Xinjiang from Afghanistan. It wasn't unusual for tomb robbers to buy such weapons to blast open ancient desert tombs. But why had these heavily armed men died unexplained in this valley? Using the barrel of a gun, I lifted the scarf covering the face of the corpse seated on the ground. His mouth was agape, as if he had been shouting for help before he died. I didn't want to look any longer. Regardless, the best course of action was to get away from this grave-like valley quickly. The explosives in the backpack might come in handy later, so I picked up the bag with the intention of urging everyone to leave. Just as I was about to urge everyone to leave the macabre scene, Al-Igwa stepped forward from the group. Whether these men were tomb robbers or not isn't the point. We can't just leave them exposed to the elements. Let's move them outside the valley for a proper burial. Seeing bodies abandoned in the wilderness like this reminds me of those who died during the labor reform with me. A pitiful end without even a mat to cover them. He continued muttering as he went to move the corpse seated on the ground. In urgency, I cursed and hurried to stop him. You foolish scholar, do you have no sense? Don't touch the dead. But it was too late. As he reached for the body, a strange snake lunged out from the corpse's mouth. Its scales glistened, and atop its head was a black crest, about 30 centimeters in length. The snake's body snapped violently, striking straight at Hal-Igwa's face. Hal-Igwa's sight wasn't good, but even with perfect vision, no one could have evaded such a swift attack. In a flash, with a desperate urge to save him, I swung my entrenching shovel and cut the snake into two pieces. Hal-Igwa, shaken to his core, sat down trembling and managed a strained smile at me. That was too close, thanks. His gratitude was cut short as the remaining half of the snake's head suddenly sprung up and, as swift as an arrow loosed from a bow, viciously bit into his neck. I had relaxed, believing the danger had passed when the snake was cleaved, not anticipating this treacherous turn, leaving me no time to save him. Hal-Igwa's face froze, his throat made a few gurgling sounds as he tried to speak but failed. His skin turned a dark green, and he became still, succumbing to the venom. We were all in shock. Professor Chen collapsed to the ground, and before I could even feel sorrow for Hal-Igwa, a cold sensation crept up the back of my neck. Turning my head, I saw another of the same bizarre snakes had silently slithered onto my shoulder. It hissed gently, muscles tensing, ready to strike. With such proximity and incredible speed, dodging was impossible. The only person in our group who knew how to shoot was Fatty, but he was occupied carrying Yi Sin without his rifle at the ready. Caught utterly unprepared by this turn of events, a chilling realization washed over me. I, old Hu, might meet my end here and never see another sunrise.